I'm Maya, 33, and this was supposed to be a day of celebration. A day where my brother married the love of his life, where laughter drifted across the ocean breeze and champagne flutes clinked in joy. Instead, the microphone stood abandoned, the officiant's paws hung heavy, and all eyes turned toward the empty seat that was mine. Now, Maya Torres will share a few words, he had announced, smiling warmly. Silence answered him. Not a cough, not a rustle, just silence. And then the murmurs began. You could hear it in waves, like the tide dragging secrets back to shore. Where is she? Did she forget? Maybe she's sick? I wasn't sick. I was done. It didn't start today, of course. These things never do. When I was 13, our mom cried for 3 days straight after losing her job. I made boxed mac and cheese for my brother and sister, pretended it didn't taste like cardboard, helped them with homework I didn't understand, and rubbed mom's back until she fell asleep. I tucked them into bed while everyone thought I was the one who still needed tucking. From then on, it became the pattern. I was the one who remembered birthdays, filled out field trip forms, picked up prescriptions. And every time Mom looked at me, she smiled that tight smile, like she'd swallowed something sour, and said, "Thank God I have you," before going right back to praising David and Ava for everything from brushing their teeth to existing. I thought it might change once we were adults. Spoiler, it didn't. David was the golden child. Always had been. Even when he borrowed my car and returned it with the check engine light blinking like a distress signal, Mom said, "He's under a lot of stress." When Ava flunked out of her first college and moved back home, I was the one who helped her write transfer applications and stayed up with her when the anxiety spiraled. "You're such a good sister," Mom would say, but never in front of anyone else, and certainly never where it counted. I didn't mind, not at first. Love to me had always been the quiet things, the making sure they were okay things. But over time, I started to wonder, who was making sure I was okay? When David got engaged, I genuinely smiled. Genuinely. I liked Talia. Sweet, grounded, sharp in the way that made you feel safe. When he asked me to speak at the wedding, I said yes. I thought, maybe this was the moment. Maybe for once my words would matter not just behind the scenes but in the light. I wrote the speech in my notes app on the train, at red lights, between client meetings. It was about love, yes, but also about family. About growing up with David, about how he'd always been my first call, even when he forgot I existed until he needed something. I made it kind. I made it honest. And then came the rehearsal dinner. I greeted guests, ran the playlist when the DJ's laptop froze, even reprinted 3 table cards when Mom realized they were misaligned. No one asked. No one thanked me. And when Mom raised her glass to toast the bride and groom, she said, "Talia, thank you for bringing joy and light into this family." That was it. No nod to me. Not even a glance. That night, in the quiet of my rented Airbnb, I listened to my own voice shaking softly from a voicemail I'd sent to the family group chat. "I'm stepping back. I won't be speaking tomorrow. I need to choose myself for once." And I meant it. Because sometimes, the only way to stop being invisible is to disappear on purpose. I didn't sleep that night. Not really. The Airbnb was charming in the listing. Rustic elegance with ocean views. But charm doesn't mean comfort when your chest feels like it's housing a war. I watched the waves crash outside the window, imagined the reception tent with its white linens and string lights being set up by hands that wouldn't even notice mine missing. I wasn't angry, not exactly. It was worse than that. I was tired. Bone deep tired. And there was something about exhaustion that made everything feel fragile, like I could shatter if someone looked at me too kindly. Around 3 in the morning, I replayed the voicemail again. "I'm stepping back. I won't be speaking tomorrow. I need to choose myself for once." My voice was calm, measured, but I remembered what it cost me to hit send. I knew what would come next. The unread messages, the silence, the strategic forgetting. That's how my family handled discomfort. Pretend it's not there, then act shocked when it explodes. I kept waiting for someone to reply. Maybe Ava. Maybe she'd say, "Wait, what do you mean?" Maybe David would call. Maybe Mom would send a thumbs up emoji pretending she didn't hear the sadness braided between the words. But nothing came. By the time the sun climbed over the horizon and spilled gold across the sea, I had made a decision. I was still in my pajamas, an old band tee and sweatpants with a bleach stain, when I called Talia. She answered on the second ring, breathless and chipper. Maya, are you okay? That was the difference. She heard it, even before I spoke. I'm not coming today, I said, voice steady like a paper cut. I sent a voicemail last night, but I wanted to tell you directly. I know you have a lot going on. I just didn't want you to wonder. There was a pause, then a soft, okay. I understand. No guilt. No questioning. Just understanding. Talia was like that. She didn't try to fix people. She just made space for them to be whole. I still want today to be beautiful for you, I added, swallowing the lump in my throat. Tell David I wish you both every joy. Maya, she said quietly, you've already given us more than enough. And just like that, something broke loose inside me. I wasn't crying, but it felt like I could have. Not from pain. From the sudden weightlessness of being seen. I stayed in that Airbnb the whole day. Didn't touch my phone, didn't open the group chat. I made eggs, took a walk along the cliffs, wrote 3 pages in my journal without censoring a word. And when the time of the ceremony rolled around, 4:30 p.m., sharp, I stood barefoot on the porch, wind tangling my hair, and whispered my speech aloud to no one. It felt like shedding skin. They could have their celebration, their polished, curated day. I wasn't angry they forgot me. I was finally done reminding them I existed. I had written a speech on a Tuesday morning in my office, in the quiet hour before meetings began. The words had come easily, surprisingly so, like they'd been waiting for permission to surface. Some of us hold the door open so long we forget what it feels like to walk through it ourselves. That line had stayed with me. It was about David, yes, but it was also about me. About all the years I'd kept the emotional temperature steady in our family house, walking on eggshells, smoothing over fights, translating Mom's moods for Ava, for David, for everyone. I used to think that made me strong. Now I wasn't so sure. I had imagined reading it with a slight smile, looking into the crowd, maybe catching David's eye, maybe, just maybe, hearing Mom clap a little louder than usual. I wasn't expecting a parade. Just recognition. A quiet thank you between the lines. But the thing about hope is, when it's quiet enough, it can sound a lot like begging. By the time the ceremony actually began, I was already halfway to the next town. I'd packed a weekend bag that morning, tossed it into the trunk of my car, and drove up the coast with the windows down. The breeze tangled my hair, and for the first time in months, I let it. No one called. No one texted. Not even Ava. And that should have hurt. But it didn't. It confirmed what I'd suspected deep down for a long time. I was never going to be the story in that family. Just the narrator. I stopped at a roadside diner around 2 p.m. Ordered pancakes and bacon even though it wasn't breakfast time anymore. The waitress called me sweetheart and refilled my coffee without asking, and I almost cried from the simplicity of it. The unexpected gentleness from a stranger. When she brought the check, she smiled and said, "You look like you needed this." I did. Back at the Airbnb, I'd left my dress hanging in the closet, the heels tucked underneath like a ghost of a version of me who still thought showing up would change anything. I didn't touch them when I returned that evening. Instead, I turned on the old record player in the living room, some scratchy jazz album someone had left behind, and sat cross-legged on the floor with a bottle of wine I'd been saving for a special occasion. This was it, I decided. Not the wedding. Not the speech. Not the applause I never got. This. Choosing not to perform. Choosing not to be useful. Choosing, for the first time, to just be. The voicemail didn't get mentioned until nearly 24 hours later. By then, the wedding had happened. Pictures had already made their rounds on social media, David looking freshly pressed in his tuxedo, Talia radiant beneath a veil of lace. The caption on Mom's post read, "A perfect day for our perfect boy." No mention of me. Not even a vague nod to the sister who helped raise him, who bought his first suit. who once spent the night outside the DMV so he could get his license appointment on time. I didn't expect her to tag me. I wasn't even surprised. But it still stung, like pressing on a bruise just to see if it still hurt. And then Ava called. It was almost midnight. Her name lit up my phone while I was brushing my teeth, and I stared at it, frozen. A war waged in my chest. Part of me wanted to ignore it, keep the silence sacred. The other part? The part that had sat beside her through every breakup, every panic attack, every 3 a.m. sob fest over bad grades and worse friends? That part couldn't resist. Hey, I answered, voice low, unsure. There was a beat, then her voice, hesitant. You weren't there. I know. You said you wouldn't be. But I thought… She paused, breath hitching. I thought maybe you'd change your mind. I closed my eyes. I didn't. Silence stretched between us, and in it lived all the things we'd never said. All the years of me showing up and her assuming I always would. That I'd bend, break, fold, but never disappear. David freaked out a little, she said finally, her voice quieter now. When they called your name and you didn't come up. He kept whispering to Mom, asking if she'd heard from you. But she just smiled and told him to keep going. That sounded about right. She didn't listen to the voicemail, did she? No, Ava whispered. She deleted it. Said if you had something to say, you should have said it in person. I felt something sharp twist behind my ribs. Not anger, not anymore. Just confirmation. The kind that made your jaw tighten but your hands stay still. I meant what I said, Ava, I told her. I needed to choose myself. I get it, she replied. At least, I'm trying to. She sounded older suddenly. Less like the baby sister I'd always protected, more like someone staring at a version of herself she didn't recognize. Or maybe she was finally seeing me. She read your name during her speech, Ava said. Only once. Said. And Maya, wherever you are, we hope you're thinking of us. Like you were dead or something. That made me laugh, bitter and soft. I was, I said. Dead tired of performing. Ava didn't laugh. But she didn't hang up either. We stayed on the line, both silent, the air between us thick with something new. Not guilt, not grief, maybe, finally, understanding. The next morning, the sky was smeared with a fog that made everything look like a dream, half remembered. I sat on the porch of the Airbnb with a mug of coffee and no plans. No one asking for help, no tasks assigned to me just because I was the most responsible. Just me, the sea, and the faint screech of gulls in the distance. I hadn't heard from David. Not a call, not a text, not even a passive-aggressive like on my last Instagram post, which, ironically, was a sunset photo captioned, "Quiet is a gift." I wasn't sure what I expected from him. Maybe a question. Maybe a simple, "Why?" But silence speaks too. I checked the family group chat out of pure masochism. Dozens of messages about leftover cake, thank you cards, someone asking if anyone had seen the gift table envelope that went missing. The usual post-wedding chaos. I scrolled until I found my own message from 2 nights ago, the one no one had responded to. I hovered over it, thumb ready to delete, to pretend like it hadn't happened, to return to the dance. But then I saw something that made me freeze. A heart emoji. From Talia. She'd gone back, listened, marked it. No words, just acknowledgement. It was more than my own mother had ever done. I stared at it for a long time. Later that day, I packed up the Airbnb, folded the dress I hadn't worn and zipped it into my suitcase. I didn't know where I was going next, not really. I'd only taken time off for the wedding, but something in me wasn't ready to return yet. Not to work, not to emails, not to the echo chamber of expectations waiting for me back home. So I drove. No destination. Just the road and a playlist I hadn't touched in years. Songs that made me feel things before I learned to numb them for convenience. Somewhere around mile marker 47, Ava texted, "Mom's asking where you went. I told her to ask you herself." I laughed out loud. She wouldn't. Not because she didn't want to know, but because the answer scared her. Because if she heard it from me, she couldn't twist it, couldn't control it, it would just exist. Raw and real and undeniable. I pulled off at a vista point overlooking the cliffs. The sun had burned through the fog, casting long shadows on the rocks below. I sat on the hood of my car and let the wind whip through my hair, the kind of silence that felt earned filling my lungs. They could spin whatever version of events made them comfortable. She bailed. She had a breakdown. She always was a little dramatic. Let them. I knew the truth. I didn't walk away to make a point. I walked away because staying had cost me too much. The ceremony started at exactly 4 o'clock, just like the program said. I wasn't there, but I could picture it perfectly. The white chairs lined up on the sand, the archway dripping in flowers I helped pick out 3 months ago, David looking nervously at the officiant while Talia adjusted her veil one last time. I had been part of every detail. The caterer. The backup rain plan. The spreadsheet color-coded down to the linen shades. I used to joke that I could plan a wedding in my sleep. Turns out, I could vanish from one even easier. They say everything went off without a hitch. Ava texted me a photo of her dress from the bridal party tent, the caption reading, "You were right. The lavender does work with my skin tone. Sorry for arguing." I didn't reply. Instead, I was sitting in a little cafe an hour north, legs curled beneath me on a mismatched chair, a cinnamon scone half eaten on the plate. The waitress had brought me a refill without asking. I liked that. Being seen without having to explain yourself. Around 4:10, I checked the time and imagined the moment they would have called my name. Now, Maya Torres will share a few words. I wondered how long the pause lasted before the confusion set in. If David looked at the program like maybe there was a typo, if Talia whispered something, trying to help, if Mom's jaw clenched. God, I hoped she clenched. Because that would mean, for once, she noticed. I didn't write the speech for drama. I didn't skip the ceremony for revenge. This wasn't a tantrum or some power play. I had nothing left to prove. I just wanted a moment where I could say something that mattered, where I could step out from behind the curtain of helpful and responsible and always there and just be me. But they didn't leave me that space, so I made my own. The waiter brought me a slice of lemon pie I hadn't ordered. From the lady at table 3, he said. She said you looked like you needed something sweet. I glanced over. An older woman with silver hair and a bright scarf winked at me over her mug. I smiled. Thank you, I mouthed. For a second, I imagined she was my mom, a different version. One who noticed. Who gave instead of taking. Who said, thank you, without strings attached. I let the fantasy pass. The pie was real enough. At 4027, my phone buzzed. A message from Talia. They called your name. You didn't come. David looked like someone had punched him. Your mom told the officiant to skip ahead. Ava almost cried. Just wanted you to know you were missed, whether they say it or not. I stared at the screen. I thought I'd feel vindicated. Instead, I just felt still. Like for the first time in my life, I wasn't running toward their approval or away from their absence. I was just here. With lemon pie. And silence. And the first real taste of peace. It was Ava who broke the silence. Not with a text this time, not with another carefully worded apology or a blurry photo from the reception. She stepped up to the microphone. I didn't see it happen, obviously, but the video surfaced later. Shaky, vertical, recorded on someone's phone, and posted quietly to a private story I somehow still had access to. The camera wobbled as Ava adjusted the mic with trembling fingers. She said she wasn't coming, she began, voice steadier than I'd expected. She sent a message. Didn't you all hear it? The room went still. In the video, you can hear a woman whisper, "What message?" And a man's voice, low and uncertain. I thought that was a joke. Laughter, quick and uncomfortable, dies in someone's throat. You can see David behind her, eyes wide. His mouth opens like he's about to speak, then doesn't. I did, Ava said. I heard it, and I believed her. She didn't cry. She didn't shake. She just stood there, in her lavender dress and silver sandals, looking like the adult version of a little girl I once pulled out of a locked bathroom during a thunderstorm. I used to be her shelter. Maybe now, she was learning to be her own. She said she needed to choose herself, Ava continued. And I don't think that's selfish, I think that's brave. The video ended before anyone could respond. But apparently, they did. Voices rose, questions flew across tables. One of our uncles, the same one who'd forgotten my birthday 3 years in a row, said she could have just come and said something after. Another cousin chimed in. No one thought she'd really go through with it. Of course they didn't. They thought I'd flinch at the last second. Show up. Smile. Say the nice words. Be the dutiful sister, the selfless daughter, the eternal bridesmaid to everyone else's spotlight. But I didn't. And that silence? That absence? It was louder than anything I could have said with a microphone in hand. Later that night, Ava texted me again. Mom's pretending none of it happened. David looks like he aged 10 years in one afternoon. People keep asking me why you did it. I just keep saying. Maybe it's because we never let you not show up before. It was the most honest thing anyone in my family had ever said. I stared at the message until the screen dimmed. Then I turned off my phone and climbed into bed. The waves outside were louder than usual, crashing against the rocks like a warning or a welcome. I pulled the blanket tight around my shoulders and let the noise wash over me. For once, I didn't need to be part of the story to know it was changing. For once, I didn't need to fix it. By the time they started clearing the tables and folding up chairs, the conversation had shifted, not toward the honeymoon or the bouquet toss. Not toward the shrimp cocktail or the signature cocktail that was supposed to taste like summer, but ended up tasting like regret. It shifted toward me. I wasn't there, but I've lived long enough in this family to know how that energy moves. Quiet at first, cautious, like no one wants to be the first one to say what everyone's already thinking. Then louder, messier, bolder once it's safe to pile on. She really didn't show? I heard she just ghosted them. No, she left a message. Aunt Sylvia, bless her passive-aggressive heart, reportedly said, "Well, I always knew Maya had feelings." The word feelings dragged out like it meant unhinged, or dangerous, or inconvenient. But then someone, I later learned it was Cousin Jonah, said, "I listened to the voicemail, and apparently he cried." She didn't sound angry, he told them. She just sounded done. 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 That word echoed. Carried. Landed. Uncle Rob, the one who always made the same tired jokes about me being the family secretary's, supposedly went very quiet after that. He leaned over and whispered to his wife, "When your sister had that surgery, wasn't Maya the one who stayed overnight at the hospital?" And she nodded. Slowly, other relatives chimed in. Memories surfaced. "Oh right, she helped me fix my taxes. She drove me to the airport that one time. She watched our dog for 2 weeks." One by one, they remembered. Not my birthday. Not my graduation. Not my graduation. Not my job promotions or the book I wrote that Mom never read. No. They remembered the favors. The quiet ways I stitched things together without ever asking for thanks. And then came the question. Quiet. Sharp. Did any of us ever thank her? They didn't need to say the answer out loud. Back in the coastal town, I sat alone at a seafood shack, peeling shrimp with my fingers and sipping something fizzy and cold. I wasn't thinking about the fallout. I wasn't imagining their reactions or replaying the silence after Ava's mic drop moment. I was thinking about how good it felt not to explain, not to perform, not to rescue anyone from their own discomfort. For once, they had to sit in it. And I? I got to taste freedom seasoned with lemon and salt. I got to breathe air that didn't carry the weight of everyone else's needs. They were finally talking about me. But more importantly, I wasn't there to hear it. He read the speech. That's what Ava told me later. In a voice message she recorded from the wedding tent, long after the sun had dipped below the ocean and the fairy lights cast golden halos over everyone pretending things were normal. David got up, she said, voice hushed like she didn't want to wake the past, and he said you wrote him something. Just in case. I hadn't even remembered sending it. A backup version, written weeks ago. In case I lost my voice, in case nerves took over, in case Mom pulled some last-minute maneuver to hijack the moment. It was still in my shared drive, titled plainly, "If I can't read it, maybe you can." I hadn't thought he'd find it, let alone use it. But he did. He stepped up to the mic, fingers shaking, the crowd already restless from the emotional whiplash of my absence. And he said, Maya wrote something for me. She wasn't sure she'd be able to say it out loud. I want to honor her words. And then he read it. Not the version I would have delivered, with wry smiles and knowing glances. Not the edited for family comfort speech that skipped over pain like a stone across water. He read the real one. The one where I said, some of us hold the door open so long, we forget what it feels like to walk through it ourselves. The one where I thanked him for being my first best friend, and gently reminded him that best friends show up both ways. The one where I wrote, this family is beautiful, but it's also heavy, I've carried more than my share. Today, I'm setting it down. Ava said the room went quiet. Not awkward quiet. Reverent. The kind of quiet where truth lands like a snowflake and melts into everything. No one clapped. No one moved. David finished the speech with tears in his eyes and a voice cracked open in the middle. Today, I'm walking forward. And letting Maya walk too. That line? It wrecked her, Ava said. Mom's face stayed frozen, the smile stuck mid-performance. She didn't look at David. Didn't look at Talia. Just stared at the cake table like it had personally betrayed her. And maybe it had. Maybe the whole illusion was crumbling. The one where I stayed quiet and useful, invisible but dependable. The family's favorite supporting character. But I wasn't in the tent. I was in a bookstore in a different town, buying a new journal and a paperback I'd been meaning to read for years. The clerk complimented my earrings. I said thank you and meant it. David read the speech. And the world didn't end. But maybe, just maybe, something else was finally beginning. They didn't talk much after he read it. That's what I heard later, from Ava, from a cousin who DM'd me a single line. Your words broke something open, even from Talia's little sister, who posted a cryptic quote about silence being the loudest kind of truth, and tagged no one, but I knew. The room didn't explode. It imploded. The tables stayed dressed, the glasses full, the band kept playing their setlist. But the energy shifted. That weight I'd carried for years? It settled into the center of the celebration like a centerpiece no one wanted to claim. A few people cried. Not the big, dramatic sobs, but quiet, dignified tears you pretend are from joy. A few more pretended not to understand what had just happened. Those are the ones who always called me the emotional one, whenever I dared speak up. And then there was Mom. Ava said she didn't speak for the rest of the evening. Not to David. Not to Ava. Not to Talia. Just sat at her table. Perfect posture, wine glass untouched, looking like someone watching a fire they didn't start but refused to put out. But her face? Ava said, told a different story, not rage, not even sadness, discomfort, guilt, maybe even fear. Because when you spend your whole life pretending the house isn't burning, the moment someone opens a window and lets the smoke out, everyone can see the flames. I could have felt triumphant. I could have toasted myself with the last glass of Cabernet I'd brought to the Airbnb, but instead I just felt hollow. Not in a bad way. In the way a room feels after the clutter's been cleared. I sat outside that night with a blanket wrapped around my shoulders, the stars sharp and bright above me. No phone, no scrolling, just breath, just space. I didn't regret not going, not even for a second. But a small part of me, the part still soft despite it all, wondered if David understood what it cost me. Not to show up. Not to speak. To be quiet, not out of submission, but out of self-preservation. Because that's the thing no one tells you. Silence isn't always surrender. Sometimes it's strategy. Sometimes it's a scream no one can talk over. And that night, my silence had volume. And every person in that tent heard it loud and clear. I didn't go far. That's the part people get wrong when they hear this story. They imagine I flew somewhere dramatic. Paris, maybe. Booked a solo trip to Bali. Disappeared into a mountain yoga retreat where phones are banned and the Wi-Fi is a myth. But no. I just drove 32 miles up the coast to a sleepy beach town with a bookstore that smelled like salt and ink, a bakery that closed at 2 p.m. sharp, and a motel with chipped paint and an ocean view that felt too good for its price. That's where I was. Close enough that I could have returned if I'd wanted to, but far enough that they couldn't reach me unless they actually tried. I unplugged. No texts, no emails. The group chat fell to the bottom of my screen, buried under meditation apps I never opened and half-finished grocery lists. My phone only buzzed once. "Ava, you okay?" she'd asked. I didn't respond. Not because I was punishing her, but because I was savoring something new. The absence of obligation. I spent that day doing nothing. Or everything, depending on how you look at it. I sat on a bench and watched a family teach their toddler how to throw breadcrumbs to seagulls. I bought a strawberry pastry and ate it slowly, like it might disappear if I blinked. I read 3 chapters of a novel I wasn't sure I liked yet. I did not save anyone. I did not manage anyone else's emotions. I did not check in, smooth over, or explain. I just existed. And in that stillness, I realized something. I didn't miss them. I missed what I wanted them to be. The version of family I had held in my mind like a fragile glass figurine, one where Mom looked at me with pride instead of scrutiny, where David called to talk, not to ask, where Ava stood beside me instead of behind me, waiting for me to make the first move. But that version didn't exist. Maybe it never had. So I gave myself permission to stop chasing it. I walked along the beach barefoot that evening, the waves cold against my ankles. There was no soundtrack, no grand revelation, just the gentle rhythm of my own breath and the certainty, quiet but firm, that I was no longer lost. I was choosing distance not as an escape, but as a boundary. Not exile. Freedom. The story didn't end at the wedding. It lingered. Like smoke after a candle's blown out, curling through conversations and gathering in corners no one could avoid. Back in that tent, after the speeches and the dancing, cousins whispered near the dessert table. In-laws traded glances. The energy shifted in subtle, seismic ways. They were talking about me. Not like before, when I was the helper, the fixer, the one they depended on without ever asking how I was holding up. No. This was different. These were quiet reckonings, murmurs wrapped in guilt. Aunt Lena, the one who used to ask for just a little help with party favors and then disappear for an hour, told Ava, "I don't think I ever said thank you to Maya. Not once." Uncle Dan said, "She was always there, wasn't she?" God, how many things did she keep from falling apart? Even Cousin Bree, who once told me I was too intense when I asked her to be on time, messaged me on Instagram. "I see it now. I'm sorry. They weren't big gestures. No fireworks, no parade of apologies. Just small, stunned confessions, like puzzle pieces being turned over for the first time. I wasn't there to hear any of it. But Ava, in her steady, relentless way, carried the echoes to me. She called while walking down her street, breathless, like the truth couldn't wait. "They're starting to get it," she said. "I don't think they'll ever say it exactly right. But they're trying." I let the words sit. Let them exist without reaching to fix, to make easier, to soothe. "Okay," I said finally. She hesitated. "Do you want me to tell them anything?" I thought about it. About all the things I'd held back. About all the times I swallowed my own voice just to keep the peace. About how hard it had been to walk away, and how right it had felt once I did. "Tell them," I said slowly, "that I'm not angry." She waited, knowing there was more. "But I'm not available either." Ava let out a breath that sounded like relief and heartbreak wrapped together. "Fair," she said. "That's more than fair." And it was. Because I didn't owe anyone my presence, just because they finally noticed my absence. Recognition doesn't equal access. Forgiveness doesn't erase boundaries. This was my echo, carried back through the family tree like a ripple of truth. Quiet, clear, and completely mine. He came the next day. I didn't expect it. Didn't get a warning text, no call, no heads up. Just the sound of tires on gravel and the dull knock of someone who wasn't sure they'd be welcomed. I opened the door barefoot, coffee mug in hand, hair unbrushed, eyes still heavy from sleep. And there he was. David. My brother. The newlywed. The golden child. He looked like he hadn't slept either. Hey, he said, voice thin. Hey, I echoed, stepping aside. He came in without hesitation but moved like the air in the room was heavier than he remembered. He stood in the middle of the little living room and didn't sit, just looked around like he was trying to understand where I'd gone, even though I hadn't gone far. I wanted to see you, he said. I figured. He nodded slowly, eyes on the floor. Then, without fanfare, he pulled a folded piece of paper from his jacket pocket. My speech. The printed one. Creased down the middle, coffee stained at one corner. I read it, he said. I mean, everyone heard me read it, but I really read it last night. I didn't say anything. I wasn't going to make it easy for him. Not anymore. He took a breath like it hurt to hold. I didn't know, Maya. I didn't know how much you held. You didn't want to know, I said softly. That's different. That landed. I watched it sink into him, watched his shoulders drop a little with the weight of it. I don't know how to fix it, he admitted. You can't. He looked up then, eyes rimmed red. But I want to show up. I want to start. And for the first time in a long time, I believed him. Not because he said it, because he was here. Not demanding, not defending, just present. I motioned to the couch. He sat. I poured another cup of coffee and handed it to him without asking how he takes it. We sat in silence, watching the waves through the window. No big apologies. No dramatic reunions. Just the start of something quieter. Something more honest. And for the first time in years, I felt like a sister, not a caretaker, not a ghost, just his sister. And that was enough. Mom's voice came through the phone like it always did. Crisp, rehearsed, half a second away from a sigh. She should have talked to me, she told Ava. I'm her mother. I didn't hear it firsthand. Ava recorded the call. Not to be sneaky, she said, but because she knew I wouldn't believe it otherwise. And she was right. I wouldn't have. Not because I thought Mom was incapable of pretending to care, but because she'd always mastered the art of selective memory. I would have listened, Mom said, if she'd come to me. Face to face, not through a voicemail. But Ava didn't let that slide. You mean like all the times she did come to you? She asked. Calm. Dangerous. Mom stuttered. Well, that's not the same. It is, Ava said. You just didn't hear her. And now, you're upset because the silence was too loud to ignore. There was a pause, and for once, Mom didn't rush to fill it. She made that choice, Mom finally muttered. No, Ava corrected. You did. Every time you forgot her birthday. Every time you called her reliable instead of brilliant. Every time you praised David in front of her and never once asked if she was okay. You made this choice for her. She just finally agreed. I played that recording twice. Not because I needed the validation. I already knew the truth. But because hearing someone else speak it aloud cracked something open. Ava, who used to follow Mom like a shadow. Ava, who used to ask me, why is she like that with you? Now drawing a line in the sand. Mom didn't respond to the voicemail I sent before the wedding, but she sent Ava a photo the next morning, a picture of our family, pre-wedding, everyone in their outfits. Missing one? She'd captioned it. I didn't reply. Ava didn't either. But I saved the photo. Not as proof of absence, as proof of clarity. You can be present in a picture and still be invisible. And you can be missing, truly missing. And finally be seen. Mom's story will stay the same. In her version, I bailed. I was fragile. I made her look bad on David's big day. But Ava's voice in that recording? That was the truth echoing through the static. Not just for me, for her too. She'd finally stopped whispering. The texts didn't come all at once. They trickled in, quiet, cautious, like everyone was testing the temperature of a room they used to barge into, and for once, they didn't start with, hey sis, or love you, or any of the hollow filler phrases that used to pass for connection. They started with honesty. I should have listened to the voicemail. I didn't think you meant it. I'm sorry. Jonah. I remember you driving 3 hours to help me move. I never said thank you. You didn't even stay for pizza. I think about that a lot now. Brie. Even Uncle Dan sent one. We always leaned on you. I never thought about whether you had anyone to lean on. That was my failure. And then David. His came a few days after our coffee on the couch, after we'd talked about nothing and everything in the span of 20 quiet minutes. Thank you for the speech. I've read it 3 times. Every line feels different now. I didn't respond to all of them. Not because I was bitter. Because I was choosing. That's the thing people forget about forgiveness. It's not a group project. It's not all or nothing. You don't have to reopen the doors just because someone knocks. You can acknowledge the knock, appreciate the effort, and still keep the chain on. I responded to Ava, of course. Her texts had shifted. Less about mom. More about herself. I told her I won't be coming home for Thanksgiving. She called me dramatic. I told her that's your word now, not mine. I told her I was proud of her. That was the first text I sent with a smile. I responded to David. Short and true. Thanks for reading it. Really reading it. I let the others sit. Some people mistake silence for cruelty. But sometimes silence is grace. A way of not pretending things are fine when they're not. A way of saying, I hear you, I'm just not ready to speak back. And that was okay. Because I wasn't waiting anymore. The validation didn't land the way I once fantasized it would. It didn't fill me up. It didn't crack open some well of joy. It just was. Like someone finally setting down a bag they should have carried themselves all along. And me? I was already halfway down the path. Lighter. Calmer. Watching the sun set over water and knowing, for once, I didn't have to explain where I was going, only that I wasn't going back. There were rules now. Not dramatic declarations or laminated boundaries hung on the wall. Just quiet, non-negotiable truths that shaped the rhythm of my days. No phone calls after 6 p.m. No last-minute can you just favors disguised as emergencies. No guilt disguised as love. No more mediating, translating, absorbing. And the surprising thing? Most of them respected it. Not because they fully understood, but because I didn't ask for their understanding. I just lived differently. And if they wanted access to me, they had to adjust. David did. Slowly. Imperfectly. But he tried. He texted before calling, asked questions instead of assuming. And when Mom asked him to, just check in with your sister about the Christmas plans, he said no. Ava bloomed. That's the only word I can use for it. She started setting boundaries of her own. She even canceled her therapy appointment once because she realized she didn't want to process Mom again. She wanted to process herself. I think I'm done being the echo, she told me on a walk one afternoon. I want to be a voice. Talia invited me over for coffee one Saturday. No pressure, no agenda, just an empty seat and a slice of almond cake. I see you, Maya, she said quietly. I saw you long before the wedding. But I didn't know how to say it in a way that didn't sound like pity. It was never pity I wanted, I replied. She nodded. It was space. And now, I had it. Not just from them, from everything I used to think defined me. I started building something softer. A group of women from my neighborhood who met for writing circles. A local librarian who asked if I'd consider running a weekend workshop. A florist named Renee who always tucked an extra sprig of eucalyptus into my bouquet and asked, "What are we celebrating today?" My community shifted. My family, too. Some drifted, some leaned in. But this time, I didn't chase or carry or explain. This time, I chose. And every time someone tested the old version of me, the always available, endlessly accommodating Maya, they were met with the quiet certainty of someone who no longer needed to prove her worth by how much she could give. I wasn't rebuilding the bridge, I was building a home, one they could visit, but never own. And it was peaceful. Not perfect. But mine. But mine. The house was quieter now. Not just the family house, though Ava said it felt different every time she visited. Like the performance is over, she'd told me once. Mom still plays her part, but the audience is gone. But it wasn't just her house. It was the whole system. The frantic group chat now barely stirred unless someone had a birthday. The endless cycle of Maya will handle it had finally sputtered to a stop. And no one picked up the baton. Not because they couldn't, because they'd never been asked to. David started checking in on Mom more. Nothing big. Just enough for her to realize there was more to emotional labor than knowing which brand of sparkling water everyone liked. Ava planned her own birthday dinner, sent out the invitations, booked the restaurant, even picked the dessert. She didn't ask for help. And I didn't offer. I want to try it myself, she said. I smiled. Good. Even Mom changed. In her own quiet, tightly wound way. She didn't suddenly become warm, but she stopped pretending. She stopped making backhanded compliments and started sitting through silence without scrambling to fill it. She called once, just once, and said, "You were serious, weren't you, about not coming back?" "I was," I told her. And she didn't argue. That might have been her version of progress. As for me, I wasn't counting on reunions or healing arcs anymore. I wasn't holding my breath for a different kind of mother or a more vocal kind of gratitude. I was watching the ripple effect. The way the space I'd carved out for myself made others reckon with what they'd always taken for granted. The weight I used to carry was being redistributed, not equally, not always gracefully. But it was no longer mine alone, and that was enough. Because sometimes the shift doesn't roar. It whispers. It hums in the absence of chaos. And in that hum, life moves forward. The retreat wasn't big. Just 6 women, a rented beach house, and a stack of notebooks. We wrote with the windows open, the scent of salt and rosemary drifting through the rooms. We read our pages aloud under soft blankets, laughed too loud during dinner, cried quietly over tea. It wasn't therapy. It wasn't escape. It was something in between, a space where we could just be. I led the sessions. Me, Maya, not the fixer, not the ghost, just the writer. I didn't talk about my family much, not directly. But it was there in every sentence. In every prompt that asked, "What did you leave behind?" Or, "What are you no longer carrying?" They knew. They always know. On the final night, we sat on the deck, wrapped in shawls, watching the moonlight skim the water. One woman, Elise, asked if we wanted to do a goodbye ritual. Something to mark the end, she said. I pulled out my phone. Not to scroll. Just one thing I had left to do. The voicemail. I hadn't deleted it. Not yet. It lived at the bottom of my saved messages, the words I'd spoken to a family that barely flinched when they heard them. "I'm stepping back. I won't be speaking tomorrow. I need to choose myself for once." I played it one last time. Then I pressed delete. Not with drama, not with ceremony, just clarity. I turned to the group, eyes damp but smile steady. "Sometimes the loudest thing you can say is no," I said. "And sometimes no is the start of a truer yes." They nodded. No one clapped. It wasn't that kind of moment. It was better. It was mine.